Robert McGill Chipman, or Bob as he was affectionately known, was born in Calgary in 1926. He was raised during the Depression in Kenora and moved to Winnipeg as a young man.
In my mind, he was sort of the consummate self-made guy, but I think those early years were difficult, very difficult years financially, and it certainly formed him. He was a very resilient guy and always very upbeat. So he started his business in a very modest way. He had a number of really small businesses when he moved back to Winnipeg, which was unique. He wasn't just fixated on one particular business that he wanted to get going. He had a gravel pit. He ran a miniature putting operation at the Red River X. He eventually drifted into the car business, but he really had an interest in business as much as he did the automobile business. I think that just ended up being the path that ultimately proved to be the most successful for him. But I think when you start a business on your own, you rely heavily on your own effort, and that was very, very evident when I was young.
Bob also relied heavily on his wife of 63 years, Sheila, who passed away February 11, 2005. She was the love of his life. He always credited her with raising the children and making his success possible. She was a real partner in his business success.
He had time for us as a family, very much so, and he spent a lot of time gardening. It was a real passion of his, and playing golf. He found a way to balance his life, but those early years when I was young, he really pulled a hard shift at work. It was just second nature to him to start things, to create things, and then to invest in them and see them grow. He loved to plant seeds and nurture and grow things, and I think he looked at business very much the same way. And I think that's what drove him, and I'm not sure where it initially came from, but he had it at an early age, and it was obvious because he started his business at a relatively early age. We were more of a sports family than we were a business family. You know, that's, and unfortunately for my poor sister, that dominated the conversation at the dinner table a lot.
Well, I was definitely outnumbered in the family. We used to have votes every Saturday night, what we were going to watch Saturday night hockey, or Andy Williams singing Moon River. And Moon River is still my favorite song because I was deprived of it as a child. It was definitely a hockey night in Canada at our house.
We didn't, my dad didn't come home and start talking to us about, managing a balance sheet or a profit and loss statement. I don't think I ever had that conversation, but he and I shared a love for the Boston Bruins, and sports were, for my brothers and I and my dad, a huge part of our life. I played golf with him weekly for many of his last years, and it was just a real joy to be able to share, sports on so many different levels with my dad.
No matter how busy my dad was, he was always home for dinner, talked to you about what you did during the day, how things were going, talked about politics, and we talked about the community, and we talked about anything that was important to us at that time.
He always showed kind of an inner strength and a calmness to the family that the family was so important to him.
Robert was always looking to improve his city, and there were two things he felt we needed most.
He was like a dog on a bone on both of those subjects. I mean, 25 years ago, he was talking about how we needed an IKEA in this town. We got involved in the business of hockey because we felt like if we did so, we had a better chance of that level of play coming back. But when the opportunity did materialize or started to become real, he was like, hey, if you can do this, you've got to find a way to do this. And so he was quietly just a great influence on that process.
His great influence is not the only trait that Robert is remembered for.
Yeah, I really had two parts of my career working with Bob Chipman over 38 years. The first part was as a young person in a young organization. We were starting businesses or buying businesses on a constant basis. I think we were adding an enterprise every month. And the second part of my career was piloting the one organization that took off, National Leasing. Its equipment finance division was the rocket ship, and I became the pilot of it. And Bob Chipman was the chairman of the company for the last 20 years. So it was fun to work with him and get a sense of how he started things, how he was glad to pass them on to someone else, but always able to stay in the background to help solve problems. And he was a phenomenal problem solver because he looked at a business problem like a puzzle. There's always 2 or 3 ways out, and they were always good opportunities. I think he understood employee engagement before it became a fashionable term. Because he took an interest in people, he really got them excited. But then he would come back to the big table and say, we need to grow this organization because we have to provide opportunities for all the young people. So I often thought that we had to be the only organization in Canada that had as a strategic plan to grow because we had to provide opportunities for young people. It didn't make sense, but it sure worked for him.
My father was doing a real estate deal down in Florida, and he was going back and forth with one of his partners, long distance. And my father, like most of his generation, was, costs were always a concern for him, and long distance, just even calling back and forth long distance seemed to bother him. And they sort of got into a game of who they would try and call on off hours. So the other person would have to phone back, and the call would be on their nickel. It was his turn to phone this fellow back, and he was delaying it. The phone rang, and the receptionist picked up the phone, and sure enough, it was the fellow calling. And my father immediately jumped up from his desk, ran out the front door, came right back in again, and then sat down at his desk and picked up his phone and said, "Chris, sorry, I just got into the office." And then proceeded to talk for about 25 minutes on the thing, and then hung up the phone. He was had a big smile on his face because it wasn't on his nickel, and he was, in his mind, and I think he was completely honest.
Bob made people feel so special, and really that's what made him so very special, was the way he just, you were the most important thing in the world when you were talking to Bob. That's the way he made you feel.
He placed so much value in people authentically, in a genuine way, that that's what caused the company to grow. And I think if I could say one thing about our company, all we've ever really done is secured great people and then reinvested around them. And that's what's allowed the company to grow from its very modest beginnings.
He was so proud of being a Winnipegger and so grateful for the opportunities that he had received in this city. He felt it was the best place in the country to live.
He liked to see people succeed in Winnipeg because he didn't want them to leave Winnipeg. He nurtured a lot of successful people in Winnipeg, and again, that was just another way of him giving back to the community.
He had a huge group of friends, and he was kind of always at the center of them. I think it was just an honest love for people that people remember him for, his warm smile, and he knew everybody's name. He had so many wonderful attributes. His strong faith and his love of people is really what defined him.
We all miss the whole Bob, the smiling face, the friendly, warm greeting, and again, that very deep interest in what we're all doing.
Robert Chipman passed away on September 9th, 2013. He believed one could do well by doing good. He believed in his community, and most importantly, he believed in people.